Hi everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the Design Thinking broadcasts.
Yes, welcome back, everyone. Well done to you all. You're doing really great by engaging with your problem and the design thinking workbook. You're gaining some new learning and hopefully developing some new skills as well as building on the skills that you already have. Great work. Elle, what are we going to be doing first?
So, firstly, we are going to be heading over to an interview that has been pre recorded with Libby Scarlett. Libby is an artist and a designer who actually graduated from Manchester Met. She talks to us a little bit about what it means to walk in other people's shoes.
So my name's Libby Scarlett and I am a designer and often work with users. So using human-centered design is quite common in my practice. Human-centered design is a kind of like creative, holistic approach to problem solving, and it really puts the people who you're designing for at the center of the project. So you work with them all the way from the beginning of the project, from the research all the way to the end, to the final design. So you're really like working with the people you're designing for. And its origins are in design thinking, which again really is kind of like about solving problems in like in human-centered ways. So human-centered design really comes from design thinking. I mostly use human-centered design in my practice in a kind of socially engaged design context. So often where there's like a problem that you're trying to tackle, and it's especially good when you really have no idea how to approach something, or it feels like the problem's maybe too big to have an impact and you're like, I don't know how I can ever change this thing. And so that can usually be quite a good place to start with when human-centered design can help you. But really you can use it for anything, and lots of product designers use it and spatial designers use it, so it can honestly be used for anything. You could use it for a branding project, basically anything where someone is going to use what you've designed, which is, I would say, nearly all the time. So yeah, you can use it for anything. Usually, to identify users for a project, I would start by making almost like a kind of map around whatever your topic or subject is, and try and think of all the people that have people or groups that have anything to do with your project. And from there, you're almost going to highlight the most interesting people that you might be able to talk to, and also thinking a little bit about how accessible these people might be. So if it's your mum, she's probably going to talk to you, right? But then if it's someone who is like very far removed from you, or someone that you think, well, they would never reply to me, then that person is probably, that it's always worth a try, always worth dropping an email or sending maybe like a direct message to someone, but kind of maybe being realistic about who you might be able to speak to, and especially if you've got a short amount of time, being able to think about like how you can gain the biggest picture around this topic or subject that you can. When I'm thinking about who I might want to speak to for a project, you're trying to make sure that you're getting like a range of viewpoints. That's really important. So maybe thinking about getting like extreme, if you're thinking about things maybe on like a spectrum, maybe like thinking about getting some extreme views as well as some more like mainstream views is quite important. And also thinking about like challenging your own viewpoint. So thinking about like actually inviting people who maybe think really differently to you, and to kind of, you don't want to design within an echo chamber, and it's unlikely that you're going to create something that's really innovative if you're shutting off certain viewpoints. And actually, if you like, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, we're learning about them. And yeah, diversity is also really important in terms of like age, gender, race, religion. So thinking about, again, it's this idea of like, how do we get as big a picture as possible about this subject matter? Using this kind of like human-centered design methodology can lead to ideas, because it really ensures you're keeping an open mind and that you're learning the whole time about your project. And so having assumptions about what you're going to find out or about what you're going to make is quite limiting. So at the beginning, we're almost trying to not, I mean, you can still have ideas, of course, that's really natural and it's great to think about what we might want to make, but not kind of restricting ourselves to any of those ideas or assuming that we already know what something's going to be before we've done our research or talked to the users. And so in that way, it can lead to some really unexpected ideas because you're really like taking, especially the things that you found really surprising from the research and from speaking to the users, you're taking those really interesting and surprising aspects and really like then turning those into ideas. So that's how it can sometimes be quite unexpected. And I think quite exciting in that way. And then also human-centered design has this aspect that once you've come up with your ideas and once you've chosen a few of your favorite ones, it helps you to evaluate them in quite a useful way, I think. So you kind of, you first of all think about how excited you are about the idea. And then you kind of, it's like a scale of 1 to 5. You kind of like rank how excited. So 5 is really excited. Then you think about how innovative and different this idea is from what's already out there. So from the research you've already done and what you already know about what's already been made around this topic or subject, you think about how innovative and different what you're proposing is to what already exists. And again, rank that from 1 to 5. And then the third thing you do is think about how feasible it is. So not necessarily how easy it is, but how possible it would be to implement this thing that you're suggesting. And again, rank it on this scale of 1 to 5. So if you've got something that's like really exciting and really innovative, but then it scores 1 on how feasible it is, you actually kind of then balance it out and you're like, well, it's great, but if it's never actually going to work, then it's maybe not the best idea. So you're kind of like with a few of your favorite ideas, then you rank them in these ways, and then from these kind of final scores you get, it really usually it comes out and you're like, oh yeah, that is the one I should make, and that does kind of make the most sense in terms of you're just trying to kind of like balance out this like how excited I am, how innovative it is, and how feasible it all is. Yeah.
Great to see some of the amazing work that our alumni are doing. Thank you so much, Libby, for taking the time. Now we're going to hand over to Andy Ellison. So Andy is a graphic design senior lecturer here at Manchester School of Art. He shares with us some of his insights into how to ask really, really good questions. And he spends some time focusing on the how might we questions that you've all been exploring in your workbook today.
So my name's Andy Ellison. I'm the course leader for graphic design here at MMU, and I use design thinking all the time with my practice because graphic design is essentially about visual problem solving. So these sorts of questions are a tool for both divergent and convergent thinking. By asking questions, you're getting people to think about different possibilities, different ways of approaching a problem, and then obviously that's that bit about you're opening up, and then the other bit is then to kind of start to identify which ones probably deal with the problem more effectively, and then you start to narrow it down to kind of go, rather than being really wide and trying to encompass everything at once, how can we be more specific and narrow it down so it's actually something that we can achieve? How might we questions are really good for practice because they get you to think about the problem and then start to think about what possible solutions can be. So to give an example, if we were looking at a problem post-pandemic about how society is feeling a bit more isolated, then we might ask a question like, how might we get people to feel more connected? So then it's about thinking about how you can focus it down and kind of go, well, okay, let's think of a particular community. So how might we get people to feel connected within a particular neighbourhood? And then that might lead you to think, how might we get neighbours to actually talk to each other? Or even, how might we get neighbours to share babysitting facilities? So you're going from something really wide, which is about trying to solve a problem which is, society-wide, to then something which is actually much more manageable as a problem that you can solve. There is a difference in ideas and solutions in how might be questions. Firstly, you're looking at the problem and then you're trying to generate as many kind of thoughts around that problem as possible. That then leads to ideas around it, but some of those ideas might not be appropriate. They might not deal with the problem at hand in more effectively, or they might not deal with a particular audience that problem is kind of an issue for. So by kind of asking more questions and starting to think about how you can make it more precise without it necessarily being too prescriptive, that's when it starts to lead to a particular solution. Because if you're dealing with a particular user and understanding their issues, then you start to be able to design for them. Tips for using the how might questions are actually quite simple. You need to relate it to the problem. So it's about considering what the issue is or what the problem is at hand, and then starting to think about who it is that you might be dealing with. So if it's a specific set of people or a specific service, and then starting to make sure that the questions are wide enough, that you cover enough to allow for creativity and allow for playfulness and allow for kind of a variety of different approaches. But also it's not so specific that there's only one answer. So it's a balancing act really of trying to kind of go, I'll ask some questions which are really wide, and then I'll ask some that are really specific, and then I might need to try and find that middle ground. But it's also about making them positive, so it's not necessarily focusing on the negatives. It's actually trying to think about like how you empower someone or how you give them control. So therefore that when you actually start to like generate the questions and kind of think about what the solutions are, they lead to a positive outcome rather than just focusing on the negative and saying, well, that's no good and that's no good. Organisations like the BBC use this a lot. And again, if you think about someone like the BBC, they cater for a really wide-ranging audience, children through to adults, music lovers, comedy lovers. So they've got to really think about their audience and ask those kind of questions about programme and about content that actually use this kind of scenario. So essentially they'll ask questions about like how might we kind of get more people to watch BBC Three and kind of watch more comedy? How might we actually get people to think about like GCSE bite size and kind of learn more about a particular subject matter? And so they have a team that kind of user-centred that uses this set of questions either within the team and also in terms of things like focus groups and canvassing opinion from the actual audience themselves and from users to kind of identify what's going to be a most appropriate approach. So another piece of advice that you can think about is considering your how might we questions from different perspectives. So you might think about like how someone might deal with this if they have a disability or they're from a different cultural background or they've got a different gender identity. And there's simple things that actually might shift your perspective from your own kind of blinkered kind of field of view to something which is much more divergent. And that can actually then open up possibilities in terms of ideas and possible solutions because you're not just basing it on your own personal point of view. You're thinking about, a wider kind of range of people within society as a whole.
Thanks, Andy. Those how might we questions are really such an important part of the process. So we all know that feeling when we get stuck. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's because we can't start, sometimes we feel afraid, or maybe it's just there's too much going on around us and too many big ideas. That feeling when you just can't seem to make something work. It can be tricky sometimes too when you're trying to work out the momentum of a new group and building a team dynamic and working out how that all works.
Yeah, definitely. Collaborations really ebb and flow, and it's the same with team dynamics. And so we're going to head over and hear from Lois. Lois is an interior designer and she uses design thinking in her work every day. She's a lecturer and is here to happily share some really, really good advice about when you feel that you're just getting stuck.
Hi, my name is Lois Blackwell and I'm a designer here at Manchester School of Art, where I'm a lecturer on the interior design course. Design is naturally an iterative process, which means design thinking is instilled throughout each stage of what we do. I use it to understand personas and user needs, but also site and context, as the two naturally go hand in hand. I'm going to talk to you a bit about getting stuck. So I get stuck on the regular and I think it's a really natural part of the design thinking process. I usually get stuck in the second stage of the process, which if we're using the double diamond methodology, this is the define stage. It's really easy to try and do way too much, and I often do this and try to tackle too much at once, like trying to fit 10 projects into one and then getting stuck on what to do next because I have too much to tackle. Sometimes it's harder to narrow down an idea when you have so much you want to achieve. But if we expect to get stuck every now and then, it feels less like an obstacle when it does happen. And I find keeping a spider diagram with all your branches, which are your thoughts, really useful when you get stuck in the define stage, so you can start to kill off some of the branches which might not suit your topic anymore. And that is 100% okay. An idea can be banked for the future, and it might be really useful for a project that you do in the future too. Don't worry about cutting ideas here and now. Getting stuck in a team environment or when collaborating mainly feels quite frustrating, but it's always easier to get stuck as a group as you're working towards a common goal, so the frustration is more shared and understood. Sometimes that frustration can even be between team members, but don't worry, it's not a personal thing. Instead, learn and listen from each other and try to tackle problems and frustrations together. If you start to feel overwhelmed by the amount of ideas you have going on, sometimes keeping it simple is the best way to stay organised. But also speaking to other people in your industry, in your course, in your family, I find this the best way to get out of a rut. You have the initial idea that you've created, but it's also important to get the insights and the thoughts from other people who have differing experiences and views to yourself. This is often where I find the most inspiration, and it's what motivates me to continue working into the next stage of design thinking and development. Group work can be really hard. In industry or outside of university, you will find yourself working in teams and groups throughout most of your career. Sometimes you can operate within multiple groups at once. Making decisions can be hard and disagreements can happen, and that's normal. Design is fundamentally a collaborative industry. Everyone will have their own opinions on design, but it's about collectively coming together to come to that final solution. Ultimately, the best way to do this often means revisiting what you're trying to achieve and why. So what I usually do is think about, are you answering the brief? Are you facilitating the need of something? I think a lot of people see design as an aesthetically pleasing activity, but above all else, it's actually about functionality and usability. So if you get stuck, it's healthy to take a step back so you can take a few steps forward. Change it to a different way of doing something or use a new methodology. Try and look at it from a new point of view or change the medium. Design research is more than just reading and writing. When I get stuck, I go back to what I enjoy doing. So that might be collage, sketching, photography. Experiment and think about what you enjoy and how this can help you reach your desired outcome. Making the most of your connections and network is also something I'd really suggest. I recently got stuck in the first unit of my MA, which was actually group work, so it's very fitting. We had what we thought was a really catchy and unique idea, and I still think it is. But as we reached the halfway point, the idea ran its course. And first of all, you go through a bit of a bereavement process of the idea you once felt really passionate about, and you have to accept that this might just not be the one. Getting back into it can be a bit difficult because you feel like you're moving backwards, but it's part of the iterative process and the design thinking process. Being inspired and brainstorming with your peers and colleagues, friends, really helps you get out of that rut. And I think fundamentally a lot of things can be tackled if you have a genuine excitement and love for what you're working on or designing. So that's all from me. Good luck in Future Me Week and this design thinking course. Remember, it's okay to get stuck temporarily as long as you move forward at some point.
Thanks, Lois. So next, we're heading over to hear from Fabia Fowler. Fabia talks to us about her work in user experience design and how she grapples with developing user profiles, how she builds her understanding of others as users when solving a problem for them. She also shares some of her experiences throughout her career. Let's take a look.
My name's Fabia. I work as a UX designer, so I'm a mobile lead. I use design thinking in my practice every day, so that can come from how I conduct myself in meetings or what meetings I have. I always have critique sessions with the rest of my team. I always get my work reviewed. I collaborate with loads of different departments, so I'll speak to developers, I'll speak to heads of, I'll speak to other UX designers. So I'm always going through the process of testing and designing and using design thinking. So UX as a term means user experience, and it's all about putting the user at the heart of what you do. So always looking back, and when you're designing thinking, is it suitable for them? How do they feel? Basically, did they manage to get from A to B, and what was that experience like? And in the industry that I work in, I work for a financial company, so I have a specific user that I need to see what their experience is like. So it may mean that if they're dealing with money, they need to be comfortable doing that. They need to know that their money isn't going to go down the drain. If they delete something, they need to be reassured that it's been deleted. So that is all part of what I do as a UX designer. I've used design thinking and empathy well, like I say, in every brief that I do, but specifically when I first started with this investment company, my first brief was to test the designs with our users and see how they feel. So that meant getting people in for interviews, making them feel as comfortable as possible. So that first initial stage of empathy was just when they came into the room saying, do you want a cup of tea? Or if they didn't want to do it face to face, I'd do that virtually. So even just setting the scene and making it as comfortable as possible. Then when we were going into the interviews, I had to be really, really clever and not be too biased. So I wouldn't ask leading questions. And also I would try and let them speak as much as possible, which is really difficult because you have to have this kind of awkward moment where nobody's speaking and you just have to sit there and let them carry on talking, because it's usually after those 5 seconds of discomfort that they come up with some gold, and that is something that you can back up your designs with, and maybe that they wouldn't have been comfortable to say if you'd have just kind of jumped to the next question. So that's how I use empathy. But also you can have that moment of discomfort and you can see that the user's shaking their leg or something, and you're like, okay, we need to kind of bring it back to the room and make them feel comfortable so we can finish the rest of this project. So that would be one way that I use empathy. And then later on when I'm designing, I need to make sure that even though I'm backing it up with research, I'm still not designing it for myself. So I'm thinking about when we go into testing again, I test unbiased and I make sure that I'm open to making any changes because that's what the user wants. I'm not being I'm not having a big ego and saying it's going to be this way because I think it should be this way. I'm still open for it to be changed because it's all about the user. User profiles are a great template to how you can design, because once you've analysed all the users that you've got, you can start to create a personality which will help you guide your designs. It's easy to keep coming back to that user profile and just that sense check to make sure that you're doing it for the right person, not for yourself. Use user profiles, but use them in a smart way. Get as much information as you can from that group and really get this strong piece of information that you can pass on to the rest of your team, and you keep on, you're reassured that this is the right thing. So I would say that using design thinking makes me think about empathy more, because you're not thinking about yourself, and that really is empathy. Think about other people's needs, think about accessibility. Whilst you may be designing something and you can use a mobile phone with, your thumbs and you can swipe, some people use screen readers. It's a lot more prevalent than people expect. Even stuff like colour contrast, you need to meet that accessibility guideline first. I think a lot of people can fall into the trap of young people love bold colours, so I'm going to make this bright and vibrant and all this, and that's great, but also you need to let the users do the thing first, and then everything else is just embellishment. I think first of all, if you are going to go out and start to test, it's completely normal to feel vulnerable, not want to do it. It's scary, you're speaking to people you don't know. So if you are going out and speaking to people, getting those interviews, start off with maybe the people that you know, or friends and family, testing the test really. So if you're doing an interview, you don't feel so confident about it, test with your mum and dad or whoever you're living with. And also, I do this all the time, I just record myself on a voice note, and it's absolutely awful when I start to listen to it and I can hear my voice, but then you start to build your confidence. You know that maybe you're speaking a little bit too fast, so you can slow it down. So there's lots of kind of little bits of preparation you can do to make it a bit more comfortable experience. So a user profile is useful because that's the refining. That's when you can start kind of testing these ideas against your user profile. It can also mean that when you're designing with a user profile and it's not quite sitting right, then maybe you've not got enough information in your user profile. So just to go back to it, get those additional questions, and then feel a bit more comfortable. A time where I thought I failed, I've got a wealth of experience with failure, and I think that comes from coming from a creative industry. When I graduated as an illustration and animation graduate, my plan was I will get a job by September. I will be a designer. because I've said so. I'm going to do all these extracurricular activities, so my CV's bumped up, I'm going to apply to this internship. So look, what could go wrong? So I remember I applied for a BBC internship. I think this was in my third year, and on the day of the degree show, I got this rejection letter. So that to me was heartbreaking, because I'd put so much onto this one internship that was so competitive. And at the time I thought there was nothing else that I could do. So if you can imagine going into your degree show and just thinking, I'm not going to swear, but it was the end of the world for me. So that meant that I had to stay in my full-time job as a stock assistant. And as part of being a creative, you do have to do these kind of little jobs to keep you going. But as long as you're persistent, that you try out lots of different things. I'm so glad I didn't get it, because it meant that I tried so many different jobs. So in the past couple of years, I've been a coder, I've taught coding, I was a pastry chef, and I now work as a UX designer. And it means that I've got this wealth of experience now, and it's just life. You're going to fail at stuff, but I mean, it's worth it to be a pastry chef for a bit.
Thank you, Fabia. And next, we're heading back out into the wild. We're going to meet Judah Armani. Judah works at the Royal College of Arts, and we're particularly excited to hear about his work with in-house records and the impact that design thinking has had on this.
Hello, my name's Judah Armani. I'm a designer who makes things, and predominantly makes things with other people. And I spend my time half in academia and half in my design practice. My practice predominantly is around creating change. So having grown up in challenging circumstances, I've become fluent in the language of loss. And so my design approach is towards that, and towards those who are on the outside of society. An example of some of my work might be In-House Records. It's a record label that's been co-created in prison with prisoners in order to create an opportunity for a more virtuous way of living and to reduce the reoffending rate. The reoffending rate in the UK wobbles around 60-odd%. And after 6 and a bit years of In-House Records operating, it has a reoffending rate of 1%. So actually designing for social impact comes with its own set of challenges as well, whether that's within prisons or whether that's within homelessness. The first challenge that brings us is speed. The clock speed of the phenomena is moving quickly, so quickly that design doesn't have the opportunity or the time to be able to do 2 or 3 years worth of research and then apply that research. In the area of homelessness, for example, a 3-year research program would probably be out of date by the time it's being applied, and the same within the criminal justice narrative. So the work I do, like within in-house, required me to embed. That's why I like working in decades. Decades allows me to be able to understand the research naturally, organically, so that when I apply those projects, I'm not doing 2 years or 3 years of research. I'm just going straight in at prototyping, which is the case for in-house. Another principle, in addition to speed, was scope. The scope for in-house required us to be able to keep different stakeholders happy at different times. So as far as the prison system were concerned, they required an educational element that provided accreditation and aspiration, and that could be rolled out across the prison system in the UK. As far as probation were concerned, they wanted something that could ensure engagement and compliance with the guys after they left prison, a safe and enabling environment to develop core competencies. And as far as the guys were concerned, it's a record label, one that develops skills of understanding narrative, expressing past, present, and future, distributed through Sony, published through Universal, and developing the opportunities for those core competences to be attributed to work experience, both in prison and then after they leave prison, engaging in the wider society. Most things have been designed, consciously or unconsciously. Our NHS system has been designed. Our criminal justice system has been designed, as much as kettles have been designed. But products and things that are explicitly designed tend to have more thought in it, and they're consciously put together. Whereas other things, services, the way that we engage in our lives, your route to work or to school, probably have not been explicitly put together in that way, but still require some of the components that design does. So my world tends to focus around things that have been unconsciously put together and then looking to consciously take them apart and then redesign them. Things that can get in the way of that are the fact that there are assumptions and assumptions that we make about other people. And so that's why research plays a big role in design. But different to science or medicine, the beauty of research and design is that we don't have to follow the rules of science or medicine or other structural narratives. In fact, we can create our own taxonomies. So in the same way that you might walk through a museum and see things laid out, like here's the dinosaurs, here are where mammals exist, you can do the same thing, curate your own research in design, and you don't have to follow the rules. So you can put elements of what you've researched into different spaces. And this allows us to see patterns in different ways. And the starting point of design is our research space. In terms of my practice, empathy plays a part, as well as dialogic and subjunctive skills. Dialogic because we need to communicate with one another and use those skills in order to be able to communicate more meaningfully. And subjunctive because actually our society is moving to a more didactic way of communicating, a task-based way of communicating. So we need to create the space for opportunities to ask questions, for pauses. What does that mean to you? How does that shape? And so the addition of empathy, subjunctive skills, and dialogic skills allow us to best enhance a design process. And design can play a part in everybody's lives, regardless of whether someone might think they're a designer or not. In fact, actually, it's inherent in every human being. We all use the skills of design, although we may not shape it or word it like that, in the same way that we design our lives, we design our days. And actually, there are some inherent skills and tools that would be beneficial for all of us to be able to engage with.
Wow, that was amazing. Really inspiring. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope that our contributors have helped you to unpick ways you can ask good questions and have given you some strategies if you're ever feeling a little bit stuck.
So, see you tomorrow when we'll be looking at develop. How to develop an idea into a plan and what to do when you need to take action. So thank you everyone. Keep up the great work and see you then.
Bye.